Oh man, we got great topics for you today. We talking about the Tennessee Three and religious charters. Come on back with us. Go. Hello, hello. Somebody got some feedback. I don't know who it is, but
There we go.
it's all good. Still got it, but it's all good. Welcome back to another episode of the South Star Classroom. I think that might be me, man. How are y'all doing?
It's two Charleses. I think that the more the
That's a
merrier.
lot of Charleses.
It's two Charleses. I think that's a lot of Charleses.
I don't know. I'm not sure. We'll figure it out. We'll get it going. But I don't think that is.
I don't know. I'm not sure. We'll figure it out.
David, I know you got two computers, brother. That's not me. So
I got one device going here.
Jubilee, you might have multiple tabs open, but it's all mute
Do
yourself real
I?
quick. Mute yourself real quick.
Okay.
Testing. I don't know. We got a lot going on right now. But at any rate, thank y'all for joining us. We're gonna figure this out. I might go out and come back in. But David, why don't you handle just intros while I get this figured out?
Sounds good. Thank you, Charles. All right. Welcome everyone to the South Star Classroom. This is episode, I believe, number 88. And we have two topics for you today. Looking forward to getting into those. I'm David Castillo, co-host of the South Star Classroom, along with Jubilee Ransom. Our newest addition to the team. Excited to have you here. So let's do some check-ins. Jubilee, let's see how you've been. How was your last week? What's happening in your world?
Phenomenal. The week was phenomenal. A lot has been going on. I am officially the mom of a preteen and teenager, 12 and 13. Celebrated my 12-year-old's birthday last week. Also, yesterday marked 1 year anniversary of me living in Maryland, being a transplant from New York City. So lots to celebrate in the past week or so.
Great. Awesome. Well, good to be here with you. And let's see, we are waiting for Charles to rejoin, and we've got some technical issues and waiting for Omar too, but I'll go ahead and go. Jubilee, may I ask you, how's my audio and video? Am I clear?
You are. You're clear.
Okay, great.
Audio and video. Yep.
All right, perfect. I am, whoa, here we go. Okay, having some technical issues, but we're going to keep going.
Yep.
Well, I'm not home. I'm up in the mountains in Arizona, so I'm in some foreign Wi-Fi. Traveling with the family this week. We've kind of done a tour of the American Southwest, and it's been great. We head home tomorrow.
Nice. Are you frozen? Are you there? Hi. It's all right. You know what? It's South Star Classroom. We're getting it all together. We've got Wi-Fi, we've got tech issues, but we're still here. You froze for a bit, but look at that. You're back.
All right. Okay, good. Like I said, we're traveling with the family this week, and we are up in the mountains in Arizona. So we've got some borrowed internet, and hopefully it lasts the duration of today's show.
It will.
Yeah. All right. With that said, we've got two exciting topics for you today, and we're going to jump into the first topic. Before we do that, I want to thank everybody that's watching us. If you're watching us on Facebook or Twitter or wherever you're watching us, make sure that you like and share the show. Let us know that you're watching, and also if you're on YouTube and or Facebook, make sure you're commenting. We'd love to hear your comments, and we'll do our best to respond to your comments as well.
Awesome.
All right. Yeah, with that said, we are going to jump into our first topic. We have two topics for you today. The first topic is around a new type of public charter school that we are seeing kind of the seeds being planted in Oklahoma currently for what would become the country's first official religious public charter school. And so this is quite different from what we've seen before. We have had some charter schools that do have some kind of a religious background, or maybe they're run by a particular group, but this is an official like endorsement allowing a religious organization to come in and open I think either a Christian based or a Catholic based public charter schools in Oklahoma. That's happening right now. So we put together a blog which I will put into the chat if you are watching, called Uncharted Uncharted Territory in Charterland, right? So for folks that are watching, you can check out the blog here. And I wanted to get into this topic very quickly. There have been a couple of pieces that cover this, and most of the pieces and the thinking around it cover it from the lens of like this current school choice wave, where it's something the parents want, and so we should just give it to them, right? Parents want classical education, public charter schools that also teach religion, right? And so what we're going to do today is kind of we're going to talk about what the positives are, right? There's definitely like a parent piece component to it, but we're also going to talk about some of the associated risks that come along with wading into this uncharted territory. Number one, I think the biggest risk, and we haven't heard too many people talk about, is the potential for discrimination, right? If you're running a Christian school or a Catholic school, not just for students, but for employees, you can run into some significant issues around discriminating against both young people, families, and also employees that may not come from that same faith background, right? So right off the bat, you kind of have this, you blur the line between the separation of church and state, and we have the potential for discrimination in a publicly funded public charter school. So that's number one. I think number two is, really what we're talking about in Oklahoma is our, like I said, Catholic and or Christian-based public charter schools. My question is, like, what happens when an Islamic group shows up and wants to open a public charter school that's based on the madrasa model? How will the public respond to that in Oklahoma? What happens when the different groups show up and they want to open a public charter school for for folks from the yeshiva school orientation, right? I think it's a little bit different in terms of we are supposedly a country that is founded on a particular type of religion and religious values based on that. But I think this also opens up the challenge to, if you're going to open the door for Christian and Catholic schools, are you also going to open up for other world religions that we may or may not like so much, and talking particularly about religions that may not be so dominant here but in other parts of the world. So that's one. I think the other piece is the record is still kind of out on charter schools in general, challenges around positive outcomes for students. And so my question there is, like, how can people, how can they say that they're going to do more? We're going to do the standard education, the general curriculum, and we're going to do religious curriculum on top of it, when we know many of our charter schools struggle with providing regular general education, well-rounded curriculum to young people. So my question is, like, how can you say you're going to do more when we are struggling to provide the basics, and struggling to provide the basics for Black and brown children is another point. Let's see. The other point is, like, we are living in this like moment of school choice that is happening across mainly red states. The voucher movement, moving public money into private schools. Now we're talking about potentially moving public money into public charter schools that are endorsed or managed by religious groups. And so my question there is, again, there's the discrimination piece, which I mentioned earlier, but also, thinking about how they do both. How do you do the religious curriculum and how do you do the standards-based curriculum? Oklahoma is clearly a red state. Most of the activity around school choice we're seeing in red states. And so a question there is, progressive politicians in, across this country.
You got an echo.
I don't.
We can hear you.
There's an echo. Okay.
You still
hear it?
Yep.
It's
It's probably
something
something over here again.
I'll go back in and
come back out.
Go ahead.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
And so,
the test.
I can hear you great. I don't hear an echo.
Yeah, I'm getting an echo,
and some people are getting an echo
Okay.
in the chat. So we're talking about public charter schools
Mm-hmm.
that
even without a religious endorsement of them are still a struggle for politicians that identify as progressive,
right?
Democrat, progressive. We know that. We've seen that nationally.
And so
my question there is, how do we get around the current concerns around accountability, privatization, and the issue around teacher unions, right?
So it feels like
maybe something that's possible within the red states, but outside of the red states, it's almost like a no-go from the start.
And the
last piece is, we're living, we talked about it last week, about the culture war. And my question is, when the culture wars pass, which they will eventually, can we get back to the basics of just really properly investing in and improving our existing public district and public charter school systems to support students that have been furthest from opportunity? I'm going to leave it there. I still have an echo.
Was there still an echo on the left?
Test.
Was there an echo when I left out?
Yeah. Here, let me see.
Is there an echo now? Okay. I think one of you all got the echo. Say something, David. Do you have an echo?
Nope.
Do y'all hear an echo now?
Nope.
Okay. Jubilee, I think it was something on your phone.
Okay. So it sounds like we're good now. So going back, so that kind of laid out this case for, uncharted territory and charter land around religious charter schools. So I wanted to get your take on it, Charles, and then when Jubilee and Omar joined, wanted to hear, based on your experience, based on your, even your like political, socio, kind of cultural background, like, what are your thoughts on this? What do you think the benefits are? And then what do you see as being some of the challenges associated with crossing this line between church and state in public education?
Yeah, I think so. One, I think we got to be really clear on the details of this, right? So we're not talking about Catholic schools. We're talking about public charter schools that are religious schools as well. So a Catholic charter school or a Muslim charter school. So I think it's a little bit different, right? When you're a private school, whatever you do is what you do. And we'll add people in one by one. And if there's an echo, we'll know where that is. So, hey, Omar, say something real quick. Make sure it's not an echo.
Yeah, I kept bailing because I thought the echo was on.
Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. I think it was Jules' phone.
Yeah, I kept reading as a result of being like, is it me? Like, I don't know what's going on.
Hey, man, sometimes stuff happens with technology, man. It's all good. Earlier,
Indeed. What's up, Bill?
monitoring the stuff on YouTube, but I want to be very clear, right? Because a lot of people were saying, we're not talking about a conflation of those two different things. We're talking about the use of public dollars and how we feel about that being in the religious apparatus. And I think for me, there's some obvious positives to that, right? If you are in a religious community and everybody is in on that, then I could see that working, especially if they don't have the resources to necessarily be able to have a private school where the kids can't afford that tuition, and you don't have somebody being a benefactor for that. But here's the thing: what's good for the goose got to be good for the gander, is what you said. So I think you have to. I am somebody that's like, yo, a separation of church and state for the following reasons, because I'm not even talking about like, religions that people know and approve, like know and we recognize, like Islam or like Judaism or various sects of Christianity. We've seen people play with the boundaries of religious institutions. We've seen, so for instance, there's been schools that they started a Christian club, so somebody wanted to start a Satan worshiping club, and under the guise of what is defined as a religion. It was a controversial thing that one had to let happen, right? So I think the way that you steer clear of that is that you keep and you respect separation of church and state. Now, listen, I also went to school in Kentucky. And when I went to school in Kentucky, there was all types of public praying and things like that. And I don't think nobody is necessarily going to stop them. I don't know. They weren't stopped then. I don't know what's necessarily going to happen. But I just think that it's such a, it's a topic that I don't think we're really ready to like delve into. And I think it's a Pandora's box that can be open. And like you said, everybody's cool and good with it when it's Christianity, and I'm a Christian, you know what I'm saying? But as soon as it's something that people don't necessarily agree with, you know what I'm saying? Like, hey, we want to start a Wiccan school, right? And it's like, I don't know how I feel about a Wiccan school being across the street,
or
or using public dollars.
Will the conservative Republican politicians in Oklahoma that are moving this through be okay when a mosque moves in and wants to open a charter school that's associated with a mosque?
Right. Yeah. Right. And so I think so that's my ultimate thought on it. But I just wanted, because I know that I saw a lot of people talking about the facts and things of that nature. And like, I wanted to make sure, because there was a lot of stuff about Catholic schools. We're talking about something completely different. Once you cross over into that realm of public dollars, I think it's a different conversation.
Yeah. We're talking about public charter schools, and we do have some now, again, that have like a lightweight association with some kind of a religious group. They might be associated with, some kind of like religious organization, but this is a full-blown endorsement of public charter schools moving into the space where they can actually be run and managed by religious organizations. So this is something that is very new. Actually, we don't even have any yet. They're actually just talking about the creation of them. So Omar, what are your thoughts on the potential benefits and risks of this new type of charter school?
You're muted, brother.
Can't hear you.
There we go. I was clicking the button to unmute and it just wasn't unmuting. I don't know if God wants me to talk about such things. Being today is Good Friday and all.
Little that's right.
Humor
and going down for this, man.
Yeah, man. You're born and raised Catholic, so there's a little bit of understanding here. I don't want to make this as black and white as it should be, but it in a bit of a way it is. I think this is a bit of a revisionist history scenario. And I think that when people get alarmed and talk about our founding fathers and they're like, they were this and they were that, it's like, how do you know? Like, did you travel back in time and have a conversation with them? Because like, I majored in both history and political science. Both emphases were on colonial and revolutionary America. One was political philosophy. The other one was on the history of the time. I've read every word that James Madison wrote in the notes about the Constitution. And people love to refer to the Thomas Jefferson statement about separation of church and state, but like everyone was about it. Everyone was about it. And everyone was ensured to say, listen, like you have the freedom of practicing whatever religion you want to on your private time, but never shall it ever be implemented into the state. And people will then say, well, like in God we trust is on the dollar bill. I'm like, the history of that is actually kind of fascinating. It was never there until the Civil War. And what happened was that the North was losing. The North was trying to figure out ways of, you know, emboldening the spirit of the Northern soldiers. And a preacher had the idea of saying, ours is a task that was commanded by God in order to win, to abolish slavery, keep the Union alive. And that was the rationale for putting in God we trust into the dollar bill. Now, people can argue that that was from like a Christianic perspective because a preacher proposed it, but the rationale was actually, if we talk about God, we can all unify that, whether that be Allah or Yahweh or the Christian God. It wasn't in Jesus Christ we trust. It was in God we trust. But it was a bold move. But that was also done in the 1800s. And what I'm getting at is that as a scholar of this time, the founding fathers were extraordinarily clear in several letters and several documents. I mean, it even goes back to the Federalist Papers. And like most people will quote Madison 10 or, you know, Hamilton 57. But even then they're like, yeah, like we don't really want this mixture because it could create a huge problem. And the huge problem is that when does the freedom to practice the religion that you want under the safety of your private time then become an oppressive situation that they were trying to eliminate, because the precedents set forth by England was one in which that the King of England created the Anglican Church and forced everybody to follow the dictates of the Anglican Church. And that was also under the premise of basically trying to legitimize divorce. See, England was Catholic. The creation of the Anglican Church was Henry VIII's ability to then legitimize a divorce because he was unable to bear male children with his then wife. And I'm trying to remember if that was Mary, Queen of Scots, or Mary Tudor. Like I get a little mixed up. Maybe the comment section can help me out in terms of like what the who his wife was. But we all know that he married Anne Boleyn. And we all know the story thereafter, and she couldn't have male heirs and she got beheaded, but it didn't take away from the ludicrous precedent that England decided to do something odd, which was suppress once again the religious artifice over a country. And the United States wanted nothing to do with that. Thus the separation of church and state. So when you've got a school that then is trying to use public money to really drill in a very specific set of ideologies, mainly Christianity, one has to realize, like, despite the fact that that money may be coming from a mostly Christian sect in Oklahoma, like, then that becomes a conundrum of, does every single taxpayer that paid into that school have a wholehearted agreement that this should be a usage of public dollars, not to educate a child, which is constitutionally guaranteed, but to then influence that child with Christian doctrine, which is not constitutionally guaranteed. In fact, the Constitution is expressly clear on the freedom of religion isn't just the freedom to practice, it's the freedom to ensure that you're not being oppressed or misguided or forced into another religious scenario. Now, people will be like, well, charters are school of choice. You can choose to go there or not. Like, yeah, you can, but like, you can't then choose to specifically designate an ideology like Christianity and ensure that everyone's cool with it, unless you went and asked every single person who paid taxes into that scenario if they're cool with that. Then right. Maybe. But even then, that sets up a very slippery slope. Now, I don't want to go off on a huge rant, which I've already done, so I don't want to like keep some of my thoughts for later, but I want both of y'all to kind of ask, like, is this becoming a constitutional issue? Or is this neo kayfabe, which I'll have to explain later, in that people are just deciding to interpret things that the way they want to in order to basically say we're a local community and we deserve this. And I'm like, well, that's not federalism.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it is a constitutional issue for sure, based on, you know, what the background that you provided in the issue of like separation of church and state, right? For sure, 100%. I think we also have to understand like where it's coming from and when this pressure is coming, right? We know this pressure is coming in this moment. We know this pressure is coming from a deep red state, and we know this issue is coming mainly from white communities, right? And so you know, is it really an opportunity to bring in all types of different religious public charter schools, you know, into the public domain? I don't think so, and I think that's why we have to be critical of it. I also think the discrimination piece is very real and a significant hazard, a slippery slope, if I might. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this whole thing pans out. Again, in the entire like public charter school sector, when we talk about Black and brown children, when we talk about special education children, we know that even in the, you know, the schools that exist, which are secular, we are not serving our kids well. So I don't know how bringing religion into the public charter space is going to help those children advance, learn, and thrive. That's a big open question for me, but we'll continue to watch this issue for sure. It's just starting out, so we'll revisit it as things progress and as we get more updates. So we're going to close that out for now. Sounds like we have our tech issues worked out
for now.
Welcome back, Jubilee. and let's see. It's let's do this. Since you're back and the tech is working, what are your quick thoughts on this before we transition to the Tennessee 3?
Leave it separate and leave people alone. Stop wasting people's time and money. Stop it. We haven't figured out what the heck we want our kids to learn, just like nationwide at the core of like what is a sound, quote unquote, American education. So I think it's a bad idea. I think it's unnecessary. And again, I maybe I've said this for every episode, but like, can we get to the core?
Right.
And also, first of all, me personally, I am a Christian, right? But I do not consider myself to be religious. And I don't consider myself to be religious because it's like bondage, right? Because there's these rules and there's these restrictions. And it's like, is that what you want to try to enact, right? Like on other people, these laws, these rules, like, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
You're good.
Yeah.
You're good.
Sorry. Ultimately, like, is that what's your MO? What is it that you want to try to do by merging these two things, right? And then lastly, I'd say, what is your local parish for, your local mosque for? Like, based on my experience, right? There's Sunday school, there's entities within you know, your local places of worship that also involve education as it relates to that specific faith, right? So it's like, what made the people want to need to merge this into the public education space? So I have a lot of questions about it, and I think right now it's giving a very firm no.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Okay, and we'll continue to watch this issue as it plays out. Charles, I'm going to hand it over to you so we can move into topic number 2, talk about what is happening in Tennessee.
Yeah, and I see that we are still being plagued by some tech issues. Omar, when your picture comes back, we'll bring you back up. But the Tennessee 3. So I also wrote about this week, and we'll put that link in. But just here are the facts, and then I'll bring up the question. Okay. So just in a controversial move, Tennessee Republicans expelled 2 Democratic lawmakers, Representatives Justin Jones and Justin Peterson, from the state legislature for their roles in gun control protests following a deadly shooting in Nashville. They also had a white lady that was with them, also a Democrat, and the 2 black men are the ones that got expelled. The white women did not. GOP leaders have argued that the actions were necessary to prevent setting a precedent that disruptions through protests will be tolerated. So the general question that I am basically asking is, one, it's all over the news now. Just what's your general reaction to the Tennessee 3 and everything that's been happening? And then we'll build on that. And if you want to add that in your piece, like, how do you teach a group of people to build communal power? Right now, the GOP is obviously flexing their muscle and kind of, I call it playing in the faces of Democrats and people and flexing their power. So I'll leave it there. And Jubilee, why don't we start with you this time? What's your reaction to everything happening? And how should we just be teaching our people about power? I think you're muted.
Here we go. Woo! I was saying, I'm outraged, of course, right? I'm outraged. And I get it. They want to try to set a precedence of what is acceptable on the floor and what isn't. I get it. I guess what I'm always annoyed by is the lack of continuity or consistency when they meet these judgments or decisions out. Like, it's not through and through. And really, the first date that came to mind was January 6th, because I'm like, I need more information. I want to know, like, how the people who decided that they felt like these Justin Jones, and I forget the other one's name, right, needed to not be able to appear, not be able to speak. I want to know how they felt about the quote unquote Americans climbing the side of, like, the Capitol building on January 6th. Like, how did you feel about that? Were you outraged by that? So I have a big question mark, just because I get that you don't want people to come in and feel like that they can respond that way. But how many school shootings have we had? At what point does somebody say, you know what, everybody's got a threshold? Like, our children should not be dying. Our children should not be going to school to die. That this should not be happening. And I think their response is warranted, right? So instead of sending a stupid letter to say, oh, you can't come in here anymore and speak, we don't want protests, to be the thing that people think they can do. Why don't you take that same outrage and apply it to the gun laws that people are asking to be repealed? Why don't you take that same, disgust that you felt for the way that they came in and apply it to and respond to the issues that they're talking about? Because I think the outrage is merited, right? And that's my take right now.
Got you. David, I'll kick it to you. And like I said, just to even reset that, it's like, this is these Democrats have been like expelled, basically. They've been punished publicly. And it was 3 of them that were there, that were from the chamber, that were there. It was the 2 black male Democrats and then the 1 white female Democrat. She didn't have that action happen to her. Only these 2 gentlemen, and the world is reacting to it. What's your thoughts, and how do we talk about power, man?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's incredibly sad, and it's also angering to see this play out in 2023. You have 2 young African American male, soon to be rising political leaders, and I don't even know what the exact rules were for why they were removed from the chamber and from the deliberations. Probably some kind of procedural thing, but essentially the existing power structures in Tennessee and the Capitol and the state government are scared, and so they know what tools they have at their disposal to continue to try and move their agenda through, or to try and minimize and or completely eliminate voices that don't align with them. So I think that's the first thing. I think one of the positive things that we can't overlook, I know it's definitely like this moment. However, you have, it was 2 African-American male legislators that were removed, and 1, I believe, white female that wasn't. And so that's pretty clear what's going on there. But, between the 3 of them, there's solidarity, right? So there's power and solidarity. I think the overall movement of the young people coming into the space, unlike January 6th, nonviolent, coming into protest, having their voices heard. yes, they're outraged, is completely legitimate, from the way that I see things. And then, the last thing is, let's not forget, we're definitely in this moment, but these legislators they're elected officials. They're going to be there tomorrow. They're going to be there next week. They're going to be there next month, right? And so it's really a matter of people understanding, like, this is why elections matter, and this is why we need not just young, but we need people that want to get involved in politics, that have a particular mindset. Wherever that looks, there's power in that, right? And in this case, these people are really trying to topple over not just a power structure of 2023, but this goes back to the founding of the state of Tennessee. This is like Old South that they're trying to like overturn, right?
Yeah, no, I agree, man. And welcome back, Omar. Listen, everybody, we just all get a mulligan today. Like the tech issues have plagued, I think, every single person at this point today. So it happens, this technology. But welcome back. Just in case you missed any of that, Omar, we're talking about the Tennessee 3, and we're talking about, we're asking you what your reaction is, and how do you teach communal power? Because what we saw today, what we saw with this Tennessee 3 thing was an act of power. And
I got a question.
You said, go ahead. Wait, who has a question?
Me, Jubilee.
Oh, okay. Let me reset it for Omar so he can get in there first, and then we can come back. I don't want to run out of time. Did you get that though, O?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I mean, look, I don't know if this is coincidence or not, so I don't want to go off on like a huge rant. I was watching The Problem with Jon Stewart. Great show. If folks aren't watching it, you should watch it. It's fantastic. He did a whole show on gun law. And in that show, he was really grilling a representative from the Oklahoma State Legislature that was talking about, your solution to these guns is to give people more guns. And he's like, well, I'm a firm defender of the Second Amendment. And he's like, I'm not talking about taking guns away from anybody, but what your solution to this problem, which is guns and gun ownership, is to then solve it with the problem, which is more guns and more gun ownership, right? And this guy didn't see through the logic of what Jon Stewart was talking about, because he has a political agenda, and his political agenda is simply to ensure that high-level conservative rights are being pushed, not just in Oklahoma, because where people confuse is that most things are done at the state level, and then they go to the federal level, right? And ultimately, most of these things are born out of state level initiatives. Look, Roe v. Wade was overturned from a state level initiative that was, that underwent not only in Texas, but I'm trying to remember the original state. It was Southern. I think it was like Alabama or something, but I can't remember. This guy's trying to do the exact same thing. The reason I'm making this a statement is because, sadly, what I've realized is that if you look at what's going on with the charter school system in Oklahoma, if you realize what they're doing with gun laws in Oklahoma, it's like the GOP is picking a perfect state to launch all these initiatives in order to basically create a totally different playbook, because their playbook of gerrymandering, their playbook of trying to wipe out the Democratic Party from elections is no longer working. So what are the tactics we're going to use to essentially wipe out the ability for Democrats to garner some semblance of power? Well, we're going to enact these things at the state level, but we're going to show you exactly the power that we've got. And that was really what happened with the Tennessee 3. And I think you guys were absolutely right in saying this wasn't necessarily just the oppression of free speech. This was a demonstration of power. And I got to hand it to the Tennessee 3, like, good for you. But like, you guys came ludicrous, or 2 gentlemen and 1 female. You all, came radically unprepared. And like, I got to tell you, like, when you come to war with the GOP, and you come with like a squirt gun and these guys have bazookas, like, cool that you made the headlines, but talk about a perfect microcosm for how ludicrously underestimating the Democratic Party is and the Americans are of Republican tactics in order to garner complete and total control. And I got to say, it's a sad day for America, because when you squelch free speech and you do so only to demonstrate political power, look, this isn't the days of LBJ anymore. This is 2023, where we're supposed to be actually solving people's problems and creating a unified spirit of America. And these people on the Republican side have the effrontery and the hypocrisy to go back to their constituency and say we're all for a united America, and then shut down their own colleagues. Like, that should tell you all that you need to know about the GOP these days and their playbook. And sadly, like, I don't really know how to defend this. So Charles, Jubilee, David, maybe you guys can see the other side of this one. I'd like to, but I don't see a defensible right on how the GOP can say we did the right thing here.
Well, I don't think they worried about saying if they did what. I mean, I think it's a. I do have an answer, but I know Jubilee had a question. I want to make sure I go before I answer. Jubilee, what was the question, and then I can go into my thoughts just on the whole topic.
Yeah, my question is just around, like, when have you seen the strategy work, right? Like, in reference to your blog where you talked about just I'm paraphrasing, right? Like, understanding the weapons of warfare that your adversary uses, right? And then figuring out how to counter that, or how to engage in that war strategically, right?
Right.
And I get it, right? Because it's just like, all right, we don't need to riot for everything, or we don't need to protest for everything, or we don't need to do those things without a strategic plan, right? And then you also mentioned how sometimes the focus can be kind of blown away with the wind, right? We're focused and we're upset about this happened, right, and the next thing happens, and now we're pissed off again. So now we're not thinking about that, right? But my question is, like, when can you give a strong example of when it has worked to defeat the quote unquote oppressor? Because I almost feel like it's like I've seen people try to galvanize in that way, where it's like, okay, we have an issue, right? We're talking about gun laws, right? Or we're talking about police brutality or whatever. And it's like, all right, people galvanize, people get together, they protest, they got signs, they go march on the lawn, they do all the things. And it's like, yes, that's the way to do it. And then somehow there's still messaging that's like, no, sorry, that wasn't good enough. Then you get people, rioting. Oh, look at the hooligans. No one has home training. Why are they so upset, right? And so I've seen many different ways of people trying to push against, the oppressor, but I can't necessarily say that I have a lot of examples of when it has actually worked, when they try the way that is, I guess, accepted.
So I don't think there's an accepted way. I want to be very clear about the thing that I wrote, and you all can go check it out. What I did was I was looking at, and so the question around this topic is less about the gun issue and the expulsion and what is kind of happening and what's spawning from there. Like, I actually do think that the expulsion can put a battery in a lot of young people's backs. Like, I think that when they come back, it can be I think they can get a lot of those people up out of there. What my piece was talking about was we have to discern between what are the 3s and the 9s on the number scale of the problem. And I'm not talking about social issues. I'm talking about when we scream about who's dating who and celebrities, and we worship celebrities, and then we move off of that, and then this thing happens and we're mad for 3 days, but there's no organizing, there's no kind of consequence that happens, and then we're on to something next week. Then the GOP is finally like, yeah, go ahead. You're not going to do anything. You're not going to stay on this topic enough. But there's a bunch of things, right? And every protest doesn't have to be in the same way, but you have examples from Bayard Rustin and Martin Luther King about the way that they organized, around the way Cesar Chavez organized, the Black Panthers organized. They didn't take down a full power structure per se, but they did lead us a step further into like progression and what that needs to look like. And so, go ahead, David.
I mean, I know you didn't include it in your piece, but I do think it's interesting to point out the fact that The rules that were broken were around decorum.
Exactly.
Right? And this is a Republican-led state house that refuses to speak out against decorum that was broken on January 6th. Anyways, so a couple of your points, you're talking about like breaking the cycle of fleeting outrage. I agree with you. You know, cultivating discipline and choosing our battles. So I think this is a moment where you know, people on the ground need to determine like what is the battle, what is the goal. Again, I think we have an example of I think what the goal is. We have young, progressive, politicians, legislators that have been elected to seats of power in that house, in that state house. And I think, you know, for the movement that's happening on the ground there, you know, I'm not super involved in it, but I would say it's pretty clear.
Oh, this is huge.
Work to change the composition of the members of the state house. That's what you have to do. You have to shift power within that actual physical building. That's the goal, right? And you actually have people in that have spoken up. They were kicked out, they were removed. But, you know, I mean, what would happen if there were 30 of them or 40 of them? Right?
And that's my point. And I think this is a great thing. This is what I'm saying. I think that this can be a watershed moment where these two young men and that woman will end up in history books if they keep pressing this. If this leads to a lot more young people going out for these offices, if they have, if this is the type of stuff that sparks a base where now young people are looking at a school board, they're looking at a transportation board, they're looking at all the places where you have a democratic process. And if they now organize and come to that, and you have your activists over here and you have the people that's making rules over here, and like they are coordinated in that. This is what I was saying about my piece. What in my piece, what I was just trying to say is this is where you strategically channel that outrage. This is something that is worth that level of outrage. Like, you expelled me, and like the young black man said today when he was speaking, like there was somebody who was like an admitted child molester that's here that you didn't expel. There was somebody that urinated in one of these seats that is now in leadership and you didn't expel. The speech that young man gave today will be carved in the annals of history now. And so I'm actually using this. I think this was really good. I think that the GOP flexed their power, but I think that with this being led by these young people, and these are very young people, there are young folks that are watching this right now all over TikTok, social media, in their high school and all that stuff, and they're getting juiced and pumped to come and take these dinosaurs out. And I use this opportunity to write a piece around know what we need to focus on. Like, because you know what else was trending just as high was Chloe Bailey's album flopping and selling 10,000 records. Like, when we get outraged about every single thing, most of it being celebrity bullshit, and then you're outraged about this, it all just becomes fog in the wind. It doesn't matter. So, you know, go back. People always ask me what I read when I did become a doctor, right? The one question I always was getting was, what are you reading? What are you reading? I don't know why people ask you that. But the thing that I would say to them is I read stuff that I read as a kid. So The Emperor Has No Clothes, The Boy Who Cried Wolf. I think those simple lessons are things for us to take. And that's what I mean about controlling your outrage. If you're outraged about every single thing, then you're outraged about nothing. This issue should rise above the fray. And that's what I mean. And will we still be on this thing 3 weeks later, 3 months later, 3 years later, 30 years later? Because the GOP does not forget. And I think that this new class of young people that are politically active, regardless of what party, I think that there are some lessons for them to get here. But the GOP has given up a lot of power by not also expelling the white woman. And I think that this is such a clear indicator that it's going to activate other people, but we have to stay focused on what's important. But I promise you that there will be something new trending in 2 days, and it will be complete bullshit. That was what my piece was more so discussing. I don't know if that answered your question, Jubilee, around what you were asking, but that's what I was meaning by it. I actually think this is a good moment. And just to give another example, I can talk about a local example when David and I worked in Oakland, and David and I were doing this work, and it was elections and things like that. And the union is a very strong power structure. And what they normally do is they intimidate, they bully, they do a lot of stuff. Well, David and I took over social media. We took over this thing that we were working on, and we took it. And our partners, they wanted to kind of retreat when that started happening, when they started calling out our names and attacking David and attacking me, and we stood our ground. And that was the first time, I think, in the history of Oakland education politics that the union had to backtrack on some of the stuff that they were doing and saying, and how they were attacking the parents that we were representing, that we were working for. But I think the reason that we were able to do that is because we stayed focused on the issue. We didn't get afraid, and we didn't fray off in all of the little distractions. We stayed on that goal. And I think that we did a good job of setting a good precedent that I think people have been following since. So, I mean, that's kind of what helped even start this podcast on some level, or keep it, or have it going the way it was we just saw the power of like standing up to those structures with a strategy, as opposed to meeting them rage for rage, because you can't.
I mean, I got a lot of comments here. I know we're running out of time. So kids are walking into, again, a fight that they don't know is a gunfight, and they're walking in with straws. And I got to say, what I mean by that is that when I say all of this connects in terms of what's going on in state legislatures, right? I point to the Oklahoma state legislature talking about this person advocating for gun laws and creating laws that will then transcend to the federal level. A precedent set at the Tennessee State House that could then translate to the national level. Because what's going on is that the media of it all is really what is galvanizing people's attention versus what is going to then be the impact of this. And I think that these two gentlemen should take a direct script from MLK. During the civil rights movement, one of the biggest turning points to ensure that the legislation was passed was televising what was going on in the South. Now, in American homes, people were seeing the atrocities that were being committed in the Jim Crow South, and it was in their living room nightly, and they're being reminded of it. And, I don't know if it was like the MTV revolution that said, like, the revolution will be televised. But like here, the revolution needs to be televised at a specific point. If I were these two gentlemen, I would have had this whole thing ensured that it was tape recorded. Someone's got a video of this. And I would start using this as a catalyst during election times, not just to galvanize an organizing movement to ensure that not only do they get reelected, but I would use it against the very people that stood against them in order to raise money nationally for those state elections. Look, if the Republicans are utilizing people in Oklahoma to try to, pass horrific gun legislation or lack thereof, the deregulation, essentially, if they're using ALEC as a company, I don't know if y'all are familiar with ALEC, but it's a company that was essentially straight up writing state legislative bills and then just changing the name of the state in order for them to pass like horrifically conservative legislation across the country, then why aren't Democrats kind of following a little bit of a similar book and saying, we're going to demonstrate nationally the kind of things that are horrifying people and Democrats, and utilizing that as a catalyst towards organization and money raising to then oust these people out of power completely? Because if you're showing up to the state legislature as two people in protest, that's one thing. If you then use that as a catalyst to demonstrate the microcosm of power in Tennessee and garner a national attention subsequently thereafter, at the time that matters most, just like Doc put into his article, at election time, that becomes a long-term strategy that really we need to show and demonstrate, because otherwise Doc's right, Jubilee's right, it's just outrage today and forgetfulness tomorrow. And I think that's the problem, is that the United States doesn't really have a long-term memory anymore. In fact, I think there was a recent article that we talked about last week that said that the attention span of a human being is now less than a goldfish. Like the attention span is now dwindled into like less than 8 seconds. I think it's something that we talked about here. What do you need? You need a reminder. In order to provide that reminder, you need extraordinary organization. And what you need is money behind it. And I think as Republicans are settling down in states like Oklahoma that are going to create compound effects nationally, where is the Democratic Party for the rest of us who aren't about these horrific deregulated gun laws, or what is an extraordinary demonstration of just straight up racism? Like, there's no other way to put this Tennessee thing other than like, y'all need to know your role, which is the greatest line of BS. Like, where are we using those strategies to combat that?
And let me tell you, this whole thing that went down in Tennessee was very well documented. There are some amazing clips online. So, I mean, everything's documented now. And some of the speeches reminiscent of, what we heard in like the 60s and the 70s, some of the greats that we all know. So I think it's been well documented. We'll see what happens to it. Again, I think I think Vita in the comments said that while the events did garner a lot of attention in the media, we know that organizing is also happening, and it doesn't get the coverage, right? Because organizing is the boots on the ground, the long-term work, the door knocking, the house parties, the human connecting. That doesn't have the same attraction as a speech in the Capitol, the House of the Capitol, or a protest. So, but rest assured, we hope those things are happening. And so we are up at time. The one last thing I want to say before we go to closing thoughts is this whole concept of decorum is straight up coded racist language.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
Absolutely.
Like decorum. Come on now. All right. Anyways.
Well, I mean,
closing thoughts. Go ahead, Omar.
I don't want to jump in. I just wanted to say, like, there's great precedents for that kind of coding. Like, famously, Andrew Card and Reagan coded states' rights as essentially Jim Crow. Like that, like we're going to change Jim Crow into states' rights. That was one of the
playing language games, language tricks.
Yeah, and like this is a old school tactic of the GOP. And like, listen, political or not, like these kinds of things just make you wonder, like, honestly, like this is the America you all want to live in. But it's not just about the organizing work. I agree. It's about how that organizing work is being shaped into a narrative that will matter. Because in this country and moving forward, if you ain't got the spin, if you ain't got the vibe, if you ain't got the right way of putting that message out, and this has been my frustration with the Democratic Party for over a decade now, you're going to continue losing the battle because you keep thinking that people are going to be swayed by logic, and people are swayed by emotion. And if you're not fighting the fight that needs to be fought, which is creating not just the documentation and the organization, but the right message that's going to resonate with people, you're going to keep losing that fight. And ultimately, that's also like my kind of closing thought on all this.
Okay. Okay. So there you go. So I'm going to pull a teacher move here and say we're transitioning to closing thoughts now. And just in the interest of time, we've got some people still writing with us, some of our viewers. So thank you for being here. Omar, that was your closing thought on subject number 2, the Tennessee 3. Now let's go to we'll go to Jubilee and then Charles, and I'll close out. Let's just choose one of the 2 topics. You can talk about closing thoughts on topic 1 or topic 2, but let's keep it brief so we can keep things moving.
Sure. I mean, I'm gonna go with topic 2 because I'm like a student here, and I just wish I had more faith in our system. I really do. But the reason I asked the question I asked earlier is because I feel like the pendulum is always swinging, the target is always moving. And so, Omar, I heard you say, like, you know, the whole organizing in a way that can be felt, can be heard, can be understood. But like when the oppressor is in the seat ruling and making these decisions, I feel like the oppressor always chooses what the oppressor wants, you know, and it disregards what is right, what is true, what is honest, what is beneficial for everyone else. So the reason why I asked for examples earlier is to see like what got the people in the seat to be able to feel and hear, right, and move in the direction of what is best for the American people. So I really have a big, you know, question mark. I still have a question mark around, you know, around what that is, because I don't have faith today in our system. I don't.
All right, Dr. Cole.
Yeah, I think in my closing, I think, and I'll keep it on I don't need the main screen. I think what I would just say is, and I'll stay on this topic as well. I think that there's a lot of strategy that's happening that looks more like emotion, but it's actually strategy. I think that all this stuff that we talked about with the GOP and the Republicans, this isn't happening by happenstance. It's not about gun laws or schools or whatever the case is, or even religious schools and all that. It is a coordinated, we are going to keep pushing and keep hitting. And we know that this other side is going to react emotionally. They're not going to have a unified front in the same exact way. And we're going to just keep pounding that. And here's the other thing. The people that vote for those GOP people do not feel or identify themselves as an oppressor. They think that progressives are the oppressor, and progressives think that these extreme right-wing people are the oppressors, right? It's a continuously moving target, like you said. So it's like, yo, where does logic come in? Where does coordination come in? And again, and I'll end that final thought just on an example of everything that we saw happen in Oakland public schools. None of it was happenstance. It had just happened in the larger playbook of Chicago. It happened in this other place. Like the actual playbook leaked. David and I received the playbook. Like there's actual rules of how you do this thing, how you say this thing, when we're gonna do this, when we're gonna do a sick out, when we're gonna do a walkout, right? And I just think that for the interest that I may have as a black man in this country who leans very progressive, that I am tired of us trying to win these moral battles, and I'm ready to win some strategic, logical battles that actually give us tangible wins to build out the things that we want, because I'm tired of trying to change hearts and minds. I want to get numbers on the score. I don't want moral victories. I want actual ones.
Facts. Very well said. Yeah, I think, and you're right. I mean, Omar said, you know, Alec has a playbook, but the left has a playbook too. Soros has a playbook too. The unions have a playbook too. Mm-hmm. So, but getting back to the topic, I'll go for topic number one since I brought it forward. Very briefly, I think it's an interesting issue. We're going to have to follow it. It's not something in its current state that I support, you know, based on, you know, how I see the world. It's interesting that this whole push for the public religious charter school is coming in this moment of school choice. Like, if parents want it, let's give it to them. It's a choice. Let's give it to them. I think that's easy and like lazy thinking. It's also thinking and a narrative that is selling right now. But in reality, like, how would it actually function? And this is how things work in the charter sector. We have 50 states. They don't know how to have charter school laws. But in the ones that do, if you start something somewhere, it's likely to grow, right? And so, again, my question is, like, where is this actually coming from? Is it coming from a place of from people that believe in access to a plurality of different types of religious public charter schools, be they Christian, Catholic, Buddhist, Muslim, or Hindu? You know, I don't think so. And so I think for that reason, we have to watch it very carefully. I think it's the Trojan horse. So we'll keep our eye on that issue. And we are at time. Thank you all for joining us, people. Thanks for hanging with us a little bit over time. Sorry about the technical issues earlier. This is the South Star Classroom, episode 88. We've got Omar, Jubilee, Dr. Cole, and David Castillo here. Have a great weekend, everybody. Peace.
Peace out.